Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Professor N.R. Kamat Distinguished Institute lecture. Today, we are honored to have with us renowned economist and Padma Bhushan recipient Professor Kaushik Basu, who is a Karl Marx professor at Cornell University and N.R. Kamath visiting chair professor at IIT Bombay. Thank you, Professor Basu, for being with us today. Now I would like to request to play the video tribute to Professor N.R. Kamath.
The chemical engineering profession and teaching in India has been uniquely blessed by the benevolent touch of an illustrious guru, Professor N.R. Kamath. N.R.K. took up the position of Deputy Director in 1960. As the Deputy Director of the Institute in the early formative years, Professor Kamath held the center stage and undertook the yeoman task of setting the framework and processes to streamline the running of academic programs. He was credited for drafting the Institute's earliest academic offerings and considered the father of all academic things, who strode the Institute corridors with the rules of his tongue. For many students, Professor Kamath was the inspiration that set them on the road to success. For some other students, his shoulders were the ones on which they rested their problems. For many young faculty, he was the ultimate mentor and role model. For the underdogs, he was their champion. For the institution, he was the epitome of an educationalist par excellence. Gurus such as Professor N.R. Kamath helped shape great institutions and bless the individuals in it with the priceless and sublime gift of knowledge that sustains over several generations. Thanks, Professor N.R. Kamath, for this priceless gift of knowledge and pioneering mentorship. You will always, forever, live in our hearts.
Now I would like to welcome Professor K.N. Narayanan, Head of the Department of Economics, to welcome Professor Kaushik Basu and give an overview about the Professor N.R. Kamath lecture.
Thank you, Aishi. Good evening to one and all. I'm really honored to welcome you all to the Professor N.R. Kamat Distinguished Chair Lecture to all of us by the Dean of Economics, Professor Kaushik Basu. Professor Kamat, as you know, that recently we had a visitor to the campus, one of a distinguished alumnus of IIT Bombay from chemical engineering. Chemical engineering, he traveled to economics, Professor Varadarajan Chari. And we were requesting him to take us through his journey. And then he was also fondly, he said, NRK. So, that's how he remembered. So there are several colleagues who know him for several, years, have been one of the founders of the institute. So it's a great honor to have this chair, and it's also equally a great honor to have Professor Basu holding the chair in the institute. And the Department of Economics is very, very happy and proud to host him in this chair. I also will take the opportunity to thank colleagues who have joined here, Professor Subhash Chaudhary, our former director, Professor Vasi, Professor Agashe, Professor Sandeep Roy, Professor Satish Agnihotri, and several colleagues and students who are able to join us today. And as a brief introduction to the speaker of the evening, Dr. Kaushik Basu is a professor of economics and C. Marks Professor of International Studies at Cornell University. He is formerly the chief economist and of the Government of India, and also chief economist and senior vice president at the World Bank. He was is the second Asian and the first Indian to be appointed as chief economist at the World Bank. And prior to moving to the World Bank, he was also chief economic advisor to the Ministry of Finance, Government of India from 2009 to 12. So let me briefly be biographical about him. Professor Basu, born in Calcutta, schooled at St. Xavier's Collegiate School in Calcutta. And in an autobiographical essay, he noted that finishing school in 1969, he was caught in a dilemma. His father wanted him to study physics, and he thought, these are changing times, so maybe he wouldn't study, and then he would study nothing. That's what he writes himself. And then as a compromise, he decides to join economics and with mathematics in St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. He went on to the London School of Economics to do his master's in economics. And between 74 and 76, he finished his PhD with Nobel laureate Professor Amartya Sen at the London School of Economics. And his area of research at that time was on choice theory. After completing his PhD in London, Professor Basu lectured briefly at Reading University and returned to India in 1977. And that's where he served at the Delhi School of Economics for several years. And over the years, of course, he has held visiting professorship at MIT, Harvard, Princeton, KU Leuven, London School of Economics, and the list goes pretty long. And in India, apart from Delhi School, he was also at the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta. He is also the founder of the Center for Development Economics at the Delhi School of Economics and served as his first executive director until 1996. Professor Basu, as you definitely would all know, has published several scientific papers in development economics, game theory, industrial organization, political economy, and the economics of child labor. Most of the top journals in the field of economics in general, industrial economics and development economics in particular, have published papers written by him. His writings in these forums have advanced the theoretical underpinnings in economics and influenced policy making over the last 4.5 decades. Professor Basu is the author of several books in economics and a play, Crossings at Benares Junction, which was published in the Little magazine in 2005. He is editor of the Oxford Companion to Economics in India, published by Oxford University Press. And one of his books, Beyond the Invisible Hand, Groundwork for a New Economics, was published in 2011 by Princeton University Press and Penguin, India, and was published in translation in French in 2017. And some of his other books include Revealed Preference of Government, The Less Developed Economy, Economic Graffiti, Essays for Everyone, and Lectures in Industrial Organization Theory, which is used as a textbook in several institutions in the world, including IIT Bombay, Agrarian Question, Oxford University Press, Of People, of Places, Sketches from an Economist's Notebook, Oxford University Press, Analytical Development Economics, Prelude to Political Economy, Foundations of Economic, a study of the social and political foundations of economics, Readings in Political Economy, An Economist's Miscellany, Policymakers Journal from New Delhi to Washington, which I strongly recommend everyone to read. It narrates how the policies are made in different organizations and different governments. And most recently, a book which was read widely by people, I must say, Professor Basu, Reasons to be Happy. Okay, why logical thinking is the key to a better life. That's what he tried to articulate in that book. He has received several awards and recognitions, and he has received honorary doctorates from several institutions. Here, I also want to highlight that we were very happy and proudly conferred on him Doctor's Honoris Causa in 2013, IIT Bombay. Apart from that, he has also received from University of Bath, Jadavpur University, Fordham University, Assam University, and Lucknow University. Now, he has also received several other awards, which includes National Mahalanobis Memorial Medal in '89, UGC Award in 1990, Fellow of the Econometric Society from 1991 till now, Padma Bhushan by Government of India in 2008, and Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Research Award in 2021. So I just want to give a gist of what exactly we try to read and understand from his work. Professor Basu emphasizes in his writings that good moral qualities are essential for growth and development within the economy. Honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity are important qualities that need to be inculcated in an individual for personal development as well as within the society for development. He also feels the need to promote quality thinking in government and public debate. Professor Basu strongly believes that the problem of inequality is somewhat different from that of poverty. Recently, we started debating about the issue of inequality in India. Piketty, drawing our attention to it. So he argues that inequality should be controlled as long as it does not make poverty worse. What a beautiful phrase how he writes it. And as far as corruption is concerned, corruption control, Professor Basu is convinced that the passion and anger against corruption has to be combined with intelligence and good policy change. This he writes in 2021. So with all this brief, writing about Professor Basu, we are extremely honored to invite Professor Kaushik Basu to deliver the coveted N.R. Kamath Distinguished Lecture. Thank you, Professor Basu. Thank you.
This stay or not? No, that will not.
We can take it.
Well, I will. No, I'll keep a chair here and I'm going to use the chair later for this. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. No, this is going to slide. Perfect. Chair can be used for paper and I can stand here.
On behalf of the Institute, I'm honored to.
Thank you very much, Narayan, for that very, very generous introduction. Thank you, Ayushi, for chairing the organizational matters on this, and all of you, thank you very much. And I have to say, as I get into the topic, that for me, this visiting appointment at IIT has been just wonderful. The intellectual stimulus that you get on campus over here, absolutely comparable to what you would get anywhere in the world. I enjoy that. Getting up and looking at Lake Powai for me is uplifting. And as I said before, when the piece is total and you need a little bit of ruffling up, you have to just get out of the gates of IIT and walk around, which I enjoy doing. I do it almost every second day. I spend a bit of time there. So overall, it's just wonderful. And most importantly, in the classrooms with the students, with the professors, it's been intellectually very, very inspiring for me. I have chosen, I've been back and forth with Narayanan a little bit, a somewhat unusual topic. I'm feeling a bit self-conscious about the topic. It is Okay. It is usually for a public lecture, you have a ready, fully done paper. I don't have that, so I made up for it by using 2 half-done papers is what is going to be the backdrop of this lecture. The one of them, I think, is quite an ambitious take on understanding labor in today's world, where with the arrival of technology, digital technology, AI technology, the very meaning of labor is beginning to change. How do we take this on? How do we reconceptualize labor? I want to spend a little bit of time on that, not getting into anything formal, but giving you the broad ideas of that. I want to begin somewhere else. Let me show you the order in which I will go. Yeah. So I will begin by very broad comments on the changing nature of the global economy. And I think it is changing dramatically. I've spoken in IIT earlier on this, and in particular with a focus on labor. So that, then this, a very early idea, which I have not actually spoken outside my own department. I've just once briefly with the British Academy I spoke, and now with IIT I want to give it. I would love to get feedback on that. The third one is a slightly different take. It's much more practical, but in keeping with the spirit of today's lecture, I am going to draw on a little bit of sociology and psychology to get an insight into what's happening to India's youth unemployment problem. So it's a practical take. It's going to grow into a full paper. That paper is jointly with my PhD student Saloni Vadeyar, who's already begun thinking in terms of taking it to data and doing some empirical work. I will give you again the conceptual outline of that. So that's the agenda, the 3 topics. Let me start with the first one. Now, no, that will be a bit later. So let me start with the first, which is just a very broad observation that the global economy is changing. And this is very difficult for us to understand, because in any discipline, and economics is guilty of this, once you've developed your subject in a particular way, you use your own categories, concepts to describe the world. And even if the world is shifting, things are changing, you are wedded to what you've been taught. The mainstream neoclassical economics is in our head. And historically, I think we've come out of previous troubles, agonies for the world, because we put in some of our best minds into understanding the world. I think of the Industrial Revolution, and I think there is a big parallel with this. Today's troubles, there are many immediate causes, but the deepest causes are to do with something which at one level is beneficial, technology, digital technology, which is making us more productive, linking us up, connecting us. So it's increasing the size of the feasible set, the production possibility set is becoming larger. But that's also changing the nature of human relations. And once that begins to happen, new challenges crop up for which we are not prepared. And I believe the Industrial Revolution was very similar. In the beginning, 1750s, 60s, 70s, 40, 50 years, technology is improving, the capacity to produce is expanding, but the world is becoming much more troubled at that time. Pollution, huge amounts, child labor of crazy levels, damaging the development of the youth, inequality shooting up, very difficult time. Fortunately, that coincided with some of the deepest understandings of economics, because from 1776, the arrival of Adam Smith on the scene, you're suddenly getting a sense of how does the economy work. And along with the very radical policies which you saw that time, especially in Britain coming in, there was also a deep understanding of the economy. I believe it is some such time, and we have to really step back and try to understand. And it's in that spirit that I will go into labor economics, but a few more remarks of preamble. How set one's thinking gets by the categories that you learn from your textbooks. And you have to learn from your textbooks, but to keep an open eye is important. I take one very good example to do with behavioral economics. Now everybody knows of behavioral economics, but behavioral economics was born or came into the profession somewhere after I had finished my PhD, when there was no behavioral economics, and now it's a part of it. It's to do with rationality. In economics, we assume individuals are fully rational. If you go back to 70, 80, 100 years, there were debates. In Cambridge, Joan Robinson and others writing, are human beings fully rational? But gradually we took rationality as a useful axiom, assume individuals are fully rational, maximizing whatever it is that their utility function consists of, they are trying to maximize that, and then you model. Once you do that, after some time you begin to believe that's how human beings are. So when behavioral economics arrived on the scene with psychology reminding us that human beings are not always rational, there are many irrational things that we do. I remember in the early days, people giving lectures saying that our studies have shown that human beings are not always rational. For me, it's embarrassing for a profession to say our studies have shown. You have to just walk around the streets, interact with people, and you should know that human beings are not always rational. You don't need studies to tell you that, but that's a sign of how the mindset gets rigid, that you need studies in laboratory. What you could learn from life, you learn from a laboratory and come home and say, you know, human beings are not always rational. Outside of the profession, this is a trivial observation. Of course, I don't want to decry behavioral economics because it has gone on to do very important things, not the discovery of irrationality. The word discovery itself is embarrassing for that, but the discovery of systematic irrationalities, to understand in what ways human beings are systematically irrational. There are patterns to irrationality. That is the big contribution. Then you begin to understand human behavior. There are other examples of the other thing that has been of long interest to me, the book that Narayanan mentioned earlier I had worked on. We forget very often, we write down the axioms of behavior literally as axioms. You know, there are parts of economics which are Euclidean. The work of Gerard Debreu is axioms and theorems. What people forget is those are the written down axioms, but beyond that, there are many assumptions about norms. Certain norms are critical for the market to function. Just transitive preference, diminishing marginal utility, those things would not give you trade and exchange and progress. Little bit of respect for one another, so that you don't go into the marketplace and give a punch to the person selling the product and take away the product. If those were our traits, we would never see a modern economy develop. Some amount of norms being built in is crucial for the modern economy to function, and there is literature, of course, going back most importantly to Karl Polanyi, but contemporary writers like Mark Granovetter pointing out that, look, economics is a discipline embedded in many other social norms and things like that on which it runs. With that, I want to get into the topic today, which I am interested in, which is labor. The meaning of labor, the concept of rights, concept of law pertaining to labor. These things I feel are going to change in dramatic ways because of the arrival of technology, which is causing the demand for labor to drop. Let me give one more example about, again, rights that we take for granted. How many categories in our brains that we take as normal, which is programmed by the society we live in, and gradually it's become a part of our thinking, and which is relevant today because many of the intellectual property rights, most of us don't fully understand what is that right. Whereas there are small groups that are understanding the meaning of intellectual property rights and grabbing that space. You know, if you look at patents or patents, for each nation, the number of ideas on which you're taking an intellectual right. Today in the world, China dominates. It's overtaken United States a couple of years ago. It's huge. It's taking out patents all over. United States is number 2. Japan is number 3, Korea number 4, India number 5. This is the world ranking of patents being taken out, which is property right in the intellectual space being grabbed. Now, there are other areas from which you realize how dangerous this is when new forms of rights come. To me, the almost emotional topic is the grabbing of land from the Native Americans, the Cherokees, by the arrival of the Europeans in North America. It's a simple historical account, but I remember when I first read, you suddenly realize that categories that you take for granted are not for granted in certain societies. See, this was the arrival of the British. They wanted to take away a huge amount of land where the Cherokees worked. So they came, they told the Cherokees that we want to buy this land from you. The Cherokees didn't understand what buying land means. It's like many intellectual properties now we don't even quite understand. So they didn't know. So their first thing to these British was that everything is yours. Ours is yours. That was the statement. The British were very clever. They said that, no, just saying that is not good enough. We want a written contract. So they said, we are happy to do that. We don't need any payment. But the British were smart on that also. They said, we want to make a small payment to you. So they made a tiny payment, wrote it down. They got into a contract. They had occupied huge amounts of land for virtually nothing. And this is a well-recorded history. The next day after the land they had bought, the British came to work on the land. They found that the Cherokees were there doing their usual business on the land. They didn't understand what it meant to sell land, because land is not something that they bought and sold. They collectively use the space. Many such things will happen as new categories come into our life. There will be groups of people who will lose out, because there'll be some groups who will understand this better, who also have the power to carry out their understanding into the world. Labor. I will plunge into something slightly technical, but before, actually I want to block you from looking at this slightly technical. One way of blocking is to give you a picture to look at so you can't read. So I will later on be going into coaching class matters. So I'll stop you from reading by having this. Though there's lots to read, please don't waste time reading. These are advertisements for coaching classes that I will get into later on. Let me step back as I get in. Labor as a category, the problem that is arising today, and a lot is being written about, is that as machines are coming in, labor is getting outcompeted. I had some data, but I decided not to inflict that data on you. In virtually all advanced economies and also upper middle income economies, if you take the GDP, national income, the share that is going to workers over the last 50 years, dramatic drop. So workers are getting smaller and smaller amount, and you can see in rich countries, two things are happening why the workers are losing out. One is machines are coming, taking over their jobs. The other is, thanks to digital connectivity, there are other countries where there are poorer people who will ask for a lower wage, but as skilled intellectually, who will be able to do your jobs. So there are workers are losing out on their work in America. What do you do? Again, because these things are new developments, lot of knee-jerk reaction going on, and some of this I think is not going to work. In the US, for instance, a lot of people would want to basically close the door and stop outsourcing. And the argument is our workers are suffering, so we don't want the cheaper labor elsewhere. But just think through a little bit what will happen. This resource of cheap labor in Bangalore or Manila or wherever has been discovered by the world, and the world can reach them through digital technology. If one country decides we will not use this labor, they can stop using this labor. Other countries will begin to use this labor. A cheap resource is available, which means if United States does not use this, United States will get outcompeted on the product market, because other countries would have used this cheaper resource, produced more efficiently at a lower cost, and will outcompete United States on the product market. So one of two things will happen. Either the US economy will do very badly by this kind of closure, or the US economy will realize that you can't do this, and they won't go the route that often is being talked about. So this is the kind of thing, the new ways of thinking which has to be thought of. And here's a radical suggestion which sounds radical, but I don't think is that radical. Inequality is something that is very close to my heart. I feel the level of inequality in the world today, in India, across the world, in many countries, is totally unacceptable. I do believe that a time will come later when we get out of this, when we will feel embarrassed. Our future generations will feel embarrassed that we so peacefully tolerated this extraordinary levels of inequality that prevails in the world. And this is connected to the outsourcing business. If you listened in developed countries to the outsourcing problem, it's always pitted as labor versus labor. It's our labor versus labor in poorer countries. What is never pointed out, which is as true, every time you outsource work, your wage cost goes down, profit goes up. There's a labor versus profit issue going on in a big way. Part of that can be transferred to your labor to protect your labor. That does not get talked about. It's being pitted in one particular way, the problem of outsourcing, and once again a sign of the way our mind is trained. So as this happens, and there are also areas where I believe labor demand is going to ultimately go down. My own expectation is 15 years, 20 years maybe, for relatively poorer economies, lower middle income countries like India, where wages are still very low, we can use conventional policy much more. We have to do better than what India has done. India has not done well at all, but we can do better, create more jobs and run. But after some time, we are going to begin to run into problems, not having enough space with the conventional policy, but that's going to come later. For now, traditional policy is possible. But let's go ahead a little bit further and imagine a world where the demand for traditional labor is gone. Let's say robots and other machines are able to do everything that is costly to us to do. This world, to many people, is shuddering, and I've been in discussions and debates in the United States saying that we can't allow this to happen. We'll have to create work. But I keep asking, why do we get worried about workers if the need for labor vanishes? Why don't we worry about capitalists and the rich people? If the need for labor vanishes, no one is working. Why are we worried only about the workers? And there's a reason. We take it for granted that everything is owned by the rich people, the capitalists, the owners of firms, so that the machines, the robots are owned by them. So whatever is being produced by the robots, they are getting it. In the end, no one is working. But some people own what is coming out of the market. There, I think we do need to think of radical policies, different kinds of policies. And part of this is radical, but in an intelligent way. We've made huge mistakes in the past by being radical in unintelligent ways, damaging incentives, enterprise. You can't do that. I do believe that if the demand for labor goes, we have to think in terms of shareholding a certain amount spread across society. In the end, if the demand for labor goes, why will some people be fabulously rich? Because they own all the shares of everything that is being produced. Part of it has to be taken away, distributed across society, and there have been people like Marty Weitzman and others in the United States who wrote about this a long time ago, that a certain amount has to be shared. And I want to clarify, I do believe that the profit motive, enterprise, those things are important. You can't take it all away and say that society will progress. You want space for that, entrepreneurship, business and all. But a certain section should be distributed. If the demand for labor goes, you have to get into that. Now to the understanding of demand for labor goes. Purely, there's nothing normative in what I'm going to go into, just pure positive analysis. If the demand for labor goes, visualizing that world is very, very difficult. To do so, one reason it's difficult again is our brains are hardwired by traditional neoclassical economics. In neoclassical economics, labor comes into our analysis in a very simple way, and I'm going to explain this with one page of PowerPoint, traditional labor economics. Yeah. Let me also keep this in front of me, it'll be easier. Let me explain how we model labor, and even if you haven't done economics, you're not an economics person, this will be simple enough. Standard way in textbooks, I'm sure in IIT you teach this way when you teach labor economics, because this is the way it's taught everywhere. Labor economics, to model a household's labor decision, we do it as follows. We think of a household as consuming a vector of goods. 1 to n is a vector of goods. I like clothes, I like services, let's say I like a head massage, I like food, there are different things, there are n things I need. Plus, one thing which requires time is leisure. I also buy leisure. So the household consumes in a standard model book, if you open up in economics, household consumes N goods and services, N can be a very large number, plus leisure. And then they get their utility from all these goods, services, and also from leisure. They need leisure, they like leisure, they get it. But consuming too much of leisure has one problem, because the more of leisure you consume, the less work you do, so your income goes down. So what you do, the optimization that each household does, is takes this utility function. Utility is a function of N goods and leisure. I've used R for leisure. L was not looking very good. So X1 to Xn and R. And the household's problem in all economics textbooks is what's there at the bottom. The household maximizes this utility function subject to a budget constraint as follows, and let me explain this to you. P1 is the price of good 1. So if you buy X1 units of good 1, P1 X1 is the total amount you spend on that. P2 X2 on the second good, Pn Xn on the third good. And leisure, let's say the hourly wage rate, say labor is a uniform thing, hourly wage rate is W. So every time you're buying one more unit of leisure, you're giving up on W that unit because your income is going down. So if you buy R units of leisure, W multiplied by R, the wage rate multiplied by R is your consumption. And let's say you have some exogenous income, Y, that's some money that you had inherited or whatever it is. So Y has to be greater than or equal to this equation of all the things that you're buying. And leisure also is something that you're buying, paying the price, which is W. This is the standard problem. Now, I want to take you into something different. And I think this is crucial, because if the standard demand for labor goes, because machines have taken over all drudge work, you have to begin to recognize that human beings will occupy their time on other things. And some of these other things will be different forms of work and leisure. We typically, in textbook models, there's only one time-consuming thing, leisure. But if you think of the goods that we buy, which we ignore in textbooks, many of these goods from 1 to N involve time. If you go to a concert, 2 hours taken away. If you go to a classical program, 2.5 hours, 3 hours taken away. If you go to a museum, so many of these things that you're consuming also has a time component that you're taking away, which we never wrote down, because in the old world, with set kind of work, there was that time element was unimportant, but I'm just now going to show you why it's important, because many of the things that you're buying, the services from 1 to N, will now, in this new world where the demand for traditional labor has gone, can flip and give you incomes. And the example is, I'll give you with one example, is a standard activity. Let's say you like to sing every morning for 1 hour. But your singing is sufficiently nice that your neighbor, and many of your neighbors, want you to sing for 6 hours. Then what will happen is, this thing which was consumed, for you that 1 hour of singing is pure innate pleasure in the morning, you may then begin to sing more, for which you will have to be compensated. So the same activity, which in small dose was just pure pleasure, at a later level, it's going to become, when you're doing too much, you may want to be compensated for it. So there will be many activities which earlier you are doing for pure pleasure. Now it will depend on the relative value of other people's, which will switch. And there are historical examples. To me, the best example of a activity which is treated as labor can switch is from Greek times, Socrates. You probably know that Socrates loved to teach. He would be all over the place, walking around the agora and stopping everywhere and teaching. And Xenophon, who later wrote about Socrates, mentions that Socrates used to like, usually teaching we treat it as labor. So others pay, the students who listen in some form, either directly or through the university, pay me for my labor of teaching them. But Xenophon pointed out that Socrates used to enjoy teaching so much that Xenophon believed that Socrates would be ready to pay to students to suffer his teaching. So they would have to come and sit, and they would incur the labor of listening to Socrates while Socrates spoke to them. So in Socrates' case, the labor and the enjoyment flips around can happen. And I feel that can happen much more now. And to model that, and I'll give you again a one-page description of the way I think this new world where normal activities will now begin to become labor and may flip from being labor to innate consumption. For that, you need a very simple recognition of something that is true, but earlier never was important, but now you have to do that one page. And then I want to go into a substantial problem, youth unemployment, very practical problem of India. So let me give you a one-page picture of this. And I need a sip of water with this. Yeah. See, what in our standard model, when we think of those N goods and services that you're consuming, we leave it as no time involved in that. So leisure is the only thing that takes up time. Total time, which was T, let's say T is the total number of time in a day, T hours. T minus leisure is what you're working. But the fact that many of the things that you're consuming is also taking up time is usually ignored because nothing big depends on that. But in the kind of world that we are heading into, this is going to be crucial. And once you recognize that, you have to recognize that among those N goods that you're consuming, some may require no time. If I buy more clothes, I've filled up my cupboard with clothes, but I don't have to give time. But if I go to more concerts, my time is being taken up. So of those N commodities, some of them may have a time component. For every unit you consume, you will have to use time, TI, units of time. For simplicity, some of those TIs can be zero. One constraint which we don't write down in standard microeconomics is if you are consuming X1 units of good one, and if each unit of good one requires T1 units of time, which could be zero for some goods, if it's T1 units of time, then T1 multiplied by X1 is the time spent on good one, T2, X2 is time spent on good two, Tn, Xn and R, the pure leisure, where you're sitting idling, looking at Lake Powai, all that you add up, that has to be less than or equal to T, the total amount of time in the day. And the old budget constraint still remains. You've got an income of Y, and you have to fit in all these purchases with this. One important thing that will happen is some of these P's may go negative, where as you consume that more, someone else will pay you. As you sing in the morning, someone else comes and pays you as possible. But you have two constraints. If you do this household optimization, and there will be students here who will be able to do this, I've begun doing this already. If you do this with two constraints, you begin to get a new theory of labor emerging. And I've played around with this even with a three commodity world, creating an Edgeworth-Bowley box where you can begin to see the outlines of a general equilibrium system where there are many activities which involve labor. The world where we are going into, mechanical labor may vanish, but things that we enjoyed in a small amount, but my neighbor enjoys it so much, I have to do more. Those kinds of exchanges may come into place much more. And this is a purely theoretical exercise, and there's much more to it. I've got about 10, 12 pages written up, not very much more written up, on how to model this new world where multiple activities involve labor, and you have to juggle this, and the status of the same activity, like Socrates is teaching, in certain equilibrium, to teach is to be paid for. In some equilibrium, to listen to a teacher is to be paid for. These kinds of flips can take place between different commodities. That can be shown by this. I'm leaving it at this. My plan is actually in a big way. I've begun, as I said, with that one British Academy lecture. I've begun working on this. And my plan is over the next 5-6 months, I will have a properly described theory of labor where the meaning of labor has changed, traditional labor has gone, regular activities have taken the status of labor. With that, I want to get into very practical problems, about 15 minutes or so, and then I'll take questions. The practical problem, I didn't want to make too big a jump to that. It is to do with labor, but what is interesting in this is a lot of it is to do with the Indian situation. But again, I wanted to keep a little bit of novelty in this. This is the work that I'm doing with my student Saloni, that we were trying to explain how, let me see how best I can explain this to you. Unemployment also has, the level of unemployment has interface with things like stigma, esteem, etc., prestige. These are things usually non-existent in our mainstream economics discussions, but they are very, very important. I'm going to show you this particular thing. I'm going to show you as a very simple model, which everybody should follow, but getting into also matters of topics of prestige, esteem, etc. I will give you an introduction to, I don't think these topics are taught, though it goes back a long way in economics. Tibor Skitovsky and others had written about prestige, esteem. These things make a difference to how economic equilibria work. I will get into that, but let me start with something very practical. The youth unemployment problem in India is very high. Okay, no reason why the indentation is different for China, so don't read any meaning into that. It's my wrong hitting a key. Youth unemployment, it's very, very high. Not just in India, actually there are countries which is greater than this. The troubled Middle Eastern countries going very, very high, but India is also very high, 15.8%. China, it's climbed over the last 3-4 years. You know, China's going through a very difficult phase. Youth unemployment has climbed, but there are other countries where youth unemployment is much less, and this is causing problem of disquiet about what's happening, and people are beginning to write about it. Prachi Mishra has written about unemployment in general, pointing that in a country like India, you have to be careful when you're looking at the price of capital, price of labor. If one is made disproportionately low, the demand for labor can go. And that can be very damaging at this stage of a country like India. Today's Times of India op-ed with Subbarao, the former governor of Reserve Bank of India, makes the same point that India has to give much greater attention to unemployment. And I will, before I get into my model, I want to stress the problem is multifaceted. I will focus like a theorist on something on which there's something to offer, something special theoretically. But unemployment is a big problem. What I do feel bad about what is happening in India is not enough thought is going in. These kinds of policies, you can't leave it to slogans. Let's have more jobs. And there's enough talent in India. Job creation is an interesting thing because the general equilibrium system of the market is a complex market. You have to pull in the best experts and say that, look, what are the incentives? Which part of the economy do we work on to get more jobs, the demand for jobs going? And my own belief, as I said earlier, another 15 years, 20 years, you don't have to think of novel policies. There's countries like Vietnam, very similar comparable stage of India's development. And don't just say it's a small country. You can think of India as many small countries. If each small country behaved like Vietnam, India's figure would be very good. It is to do with not enough thought is going into policies, and I do have views about India's labor laws. I have been talking about it, but I don't want to go into it. I want to focus here on one problem which struck us looking at the Indian youth unemployment data is maybe something specific to do with India, and it's rooted in a very standard kind of theory. There's popular writing on this is all over the place, that whole lot of people from the age group, this is, I think this is World Bank data, so 15 to 24 years is the age group for which the unemployment rate is 15+% in India. Just in case there are non-economists in the audience, I want to clarify. Unemployment rate does not mean of that age group the percentage that is not working. It means of that age group, those who want to work, not those who are in college, they are not even being counted. Those who want to work, the percentage that is not finding work. That's very important. Otherwise, 15 to that age, many will not want to work at that early stage. But those who want to work, 15.8%, 15.7% not finding work. That is the unemployment rate. Now, one particular factor which is probably becoming quite important in India, has been for a while but becoming even more important, is the craze for government jobs. There are people who are waiting endlessly. They want to work, not that they don't want to work, but they want a specific job. So they are in coaching classes endlessly trying to get into this job. Here are some numbers for you. In 2002, 1.1 million youngsters took entrance exams for 1,022 government jobs. This will require a year of preparation, often more than that, which means the probability of getting a job for which you're wasting a year is 1 out of 1,000, roughly. That's the probability of getting a job. You're wasting a full year for this. Wasting means, I'll get into that. You may want to do it. It's at the policy level, we have to intervene. And there are cases. Most of this is journalistic writing. In fact, I know the names of these people, but I blocked them out because these are sad stories that you get all over. RS spent 10 years taking the UPSC exam and failing. Finally, he got into Jammu and Kashmir Public Service Commission and started working. So 10 years of waiting, repeated coaching classes. And KK spent 8 years in Delhi training in coaching classes, taking entrance examinations for various government jobs. Finally, disheartened and broken-hearted, he gave up and returned to his hometown Darbhanga to take up some informal sector job. This is taken out of writings. I'm virtually quoting out of that, just blocking out the name for now. Though the name is public, this is, I don't know what's happening to the second person, for instance, who's gone back and full of this. We wanted to understand this, and once again, with a very hard headedness of economics, trying to see, can this explain a part of the youth unemployment problem? And this is the picture that I had earlier. I think this is Mukherjee Nagar, I've forgotten, which close to Delhi School of Economics, I'm told. I haven't been there now for 30 years. If you go there, it's just coaching classes, just all over, the people being brought in. I want you to understand this, and I'm going to do a little bit of model, and the model building is very simple for economists. You will very soon begin to see a parallel with something standard in economics, but after that, I'm going to bring in esteem and prestige as something that people seek in life. And once you bring that in, you get another dimension, which there have been models of prestige and esteem in other areas, but in this we have not seen. That is our paper. So let me just explain the model. It's quite simple and it's intuitive. There are 1 or 2 little bits of algebra you can skip if you follow the intuition. Youngsters coming out of college have 2 choices. Again, for simplicity, I'm getting into economic theory, just 2 kinds. Join the private sector. Let's say there's one kind of job. If you've got very basic education, you are then thinking of the standard job. You've gone to an ordinary college, you're finishing that. Simple job. You're not going to get a fancy job. So one job, private sector job is available. The other is joining government. Various kinds of services. Suppose there are n individuals seeking jobs. There are m government jobs, m less than n people seeking jobs, m government jobs available. For simplicity, assume that the private sector job is a flat one with the same wage W. You can, if you've done economic theory, you'll know all these, you can make them more realistic. There are 3 wage rates available on the private sector. It'll increase your algebra, but nothing really, some of this you won't get any interesting results, so I've kept it very simple. Suppose government jobs have many, so the private sector job, I'm treating it as wages, the wages W, and that's the value of that job. The government sector job has wage and disproportionate amount of perquisites, benefits that you get by virtue of working in government. I've done it for almost 3 years, and I know that the perquisites way outstrip the salary or the wage that you get. So you're getting cars, you're getting homes or whatever, and you are getting a guarantee of a job, a permanence of a job. So these are all very mechanical things, but given that in a government job there are 2 components, straight salary and there are other benefits, I am allowing for the fact that every individual looking for a job could have different valuations for the government job. Some love it because these perks to them are very important. Some don't like it because the perks don't like it as much because the perks are not so important. So the private sector job, I've kept it as flat W. You get a government job. If you're person I, your value of that job is VI. Is the value that you get. Let me see if I have the picture. Yes. So the next picture is going to show you the valuation of people that as you go from 0 to I, all these individuals, 0 to n, there are n individuals, each person's value is on the vertical axis, and person 1 values it most, person n values it least. You may ask, why are you making this assumption that 1, 2, 3 valuation goes down? That is not an assumption. People have different values. I have named people in a way so that it goes down. The person who values it most, I've called that person 1. Values it second most, person 2. So the downward slope of this curve is not an assumption, it's a naming convention. I've just named them in that manner. So this is the valuation. And all the relevant things are now in the picture. W is the wage rate, and with the wage rate, if in the private sector, typically up to that capital I people would have gone for government job, and beyond that, they would prefer to be in the private sector because the wage curve is above the valuation. But government jobs are limited up to M. So now you have a problem. Only way you can go for a government job is, I'm just thinking how much detail I'll take you into this. I won't take you into any detail. I'll jump to the final description with a picture. And I can virtually tell you what's happening. What now happens is that there's limited number of government jobs. You value it high, and you are trying to get into it. So the government job now becomes like a bit of a lottery. The way to get a government job is you join the pool of another 1,000, 100,000 people taking coaching classes, preparing, etc. It's almost like you bought a lottery ticket with which you have to wait for a year. At the end of the year, you'll know whether you've got it or not. So the coaching class industry is almost like a lottery. I'm again not getting into, and there's scope for that, and that we do plan to do work on that. The modeling the coaching classes, and I've been now picking up stories, horror stories of how they know how to keep up a larger number of people forever in this pool taking these courses. But that part I'm blocking it out. So limited number of jobs, lots of people want it, you're getting a lottery. What you get finally in this analysis is the following result. What will happen is very, very similar to Lewis's model and the Harris-Todaro model that you will all be familiar with. People wanting urban jobs go there and wait around without any proper job, hoping to get a good job. What's happening, the pool of people who are waiting to get into government, and it's a very large number, it's a very similar thing like in the Lewis model, where there's a large number of people repeatedly taking classes. I do know that there are people who take it for 9, 10 years. I've read records of that. 1 year is very standard. I don't know what the mean is. There'll be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years will be the average number of years that they are taking. They are just in this pool waiting for this, and a small segment is going to get this job. This explains a large amount of unemployment flocking around this, and that can go even bigger, and I will come to that in a moment. But this, by the way, the economists, I don't know how many, everyone will be familiar with Arthur Lewis's work and Harris-Todaro. Fascinatingly, you know, Arthur Lewis, who is from the West Indies, and then wrote this classic paper. Later he would get the Nobel Prize. Classic paper published in Manchester School in 1954. He has written, and this is the way the best ideas don't occur when you're sitting at the table and consciously trying to prove. He has a beautiful account of his most famous paper where the idea struck him. He was in Bangkok, I believe it was in 1952. He was saying he was walking in Bangkok, and this is troubling him. How do you describe a developing country? It's not totally different from a developed country, but there are differences. And during this walk, the Lewis model suddenly lit up in his head, and he said he turned back, quickly went back to his hotel, and he started working on this. And then the 1954 Manchester School famous paper comes out, the work of Arthur Lewis on this. What we've done over here is similar to a Lewisian model being applied to a different context. Let me take just 5 minutes, and I'll jump over this. Well, I'll show you one figure. This figure is actually worth keeping in mind a little bit. Take a case where everyone values the government job at the same level, V. I've taken a case where everyone values it at level V. Everyone values the private sector job at level W, but there are only M government jobs. In which case, M people get V, and the others will join the pool. how many will join the pool? If you want to work out, if people are rational, they are doing a calculation. If you're in the pool, if so many people are in the pool, if more people are in the pool, your probability is going down. Keeping this, if you do a calculation, the number of people for whom the lottery ticket of spending a year waiting for a government job is worthwhile is a very easy technique. People who do economic theory will be able to work it out. I'm not wasting time. If you take the government equilibrium, salary of V, M people are doing, from there if you drop a rectangular hyperbola, where the rectangular hyperbola crosses the W line, that is the equilibrium, where M to R star will join the lottery. Basically, 0 to R star will join the lottery, 0 to M will get those jobs, and R star to N will not even, will go straight to the private sector job. So M to R star is the equilibrium. The next bit, as I'm saying, I'm thinking I'm going to do it verbally. Let me give you the backdrop and then I will explain it verbally. I think I can get the gist of the idea, and this is virtually a written paper. Within a month, I'll be able to share it with you if you get interested. I would love to get feedback because we want to extend the model further and get into empirical work. I won't get into the empirical work, but I'll push others into the empirical work, including my student. Now, here is the extension we've done, which got us very excited. You know, prestige, esteem, we typically in economics we treat as though that does not matter. But we know, going back to the time of Thorstein Veblen, the Veblen-esque preferences, early political economist, very, very difficult human being, but a very brilliant human being. Veblen wrote about that prestige, esteem, these things form a lot of human activity. And I also do believe that wealth seeking for the super rich, most of it is to do with trying to be richer than the other super rich person. So if you can use a taxation system to cramp all of them, you will not take away their incentive because the relative incentive will remain. I want to beat the other person, as long as you don't disturb the relative ranking. So there's a lot of scope for greater equalization without damaging incentives. Esteem and prestige are important. Beautiful ideas by Tibor Skitovsky earlier who wrote about this. And later on there are works. For instance, a very, very beautiful paper by, do I have the reference here? Yeah, George Akerlof wrote about it after his visit to India. He picked up some ideas about esteem. He wrote about caste in India, a model in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, where he picks that up on how others treat you is very, very important. One modeling exercise that was done is by Assar Lindbeck, Stan Newberg, and Jörgen Weibull about Swedish unemployment. They show that to understand Swedish unemployment, you need to bring in the use of stigma. When you're choosing to be unemployed, you're doing your usual calculations that we economists stress. This is my salary goes down, but I get more leisure, I have very little income, but I have lots of leisure, etc. But this paper in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, these three writers point out there's one more thing which is very important. What will our neighbors say? Stigmatize. Will they stigmatize you by saying that, look, you sit at home? And they show that Sweden has gone through phases when being unemployed, the stigma status has changed. There have been periods where you show off that I'm unemployed, but I'm composing music. I think there are some top pop stars came out of Swedish unemployment. So there it became the opposite. But there were periods when it gets very heavily stigmatized, and they go into macroeconomics and shows that to understand Swedish unemployment, that's important. What we bring in over here is getting into these government jobs, quite apart from the security of the job, the perquisites that you get, the salary, which may not be particularly high, but those other things are high. Apart from that, there's something else, which we don't always appreciate sitting in Mumbai or Delhi or wherever, but in small towns, the prestige associated with it. Someone's child gets in to a simple government job, and the neighbors drum up that this is a great thing that the person has got. One group that understands this is the coaching class industry, and you will see this, that's what I was, I've just taken a random page out of somewhere. You'll see perennially it's happening. Pictures coming out, and when I talk to, very occasionally to people who are in that category, desperate to get in, they get thrilled that my uncle's cousin's nephew's cousin, his picture has come out in the newspaper. that has made it to this. So this is a big category. If you bring prestige into the model, I did have it written up, but I'm going to give it to you verbally now. You will get the gist of it. In your calculations, whether to apply for a government job, join the pool, lottery pool, of the value of the government job, one of them, apart from the perquisites, the salary, is the prestige that you're getting. The prestige that you get is a muffled big subject, prestige and esteem, but one thing you can say, if the ratio of number of jobs to number of people trying for that job, if that ratio becomes smaller, prestige will go up because the job is becoming like a prize. Now you'll get a very interesting dynamic taking place. I could have done it in 2 pages, but I won't inflict. I can almost do it verbally. Suppose, as I just showed in a standard equilibrium, there'll be a small pool of people who are unemployed waiting for this job. So there is this job, some number of people are waiting for it, lottery, some prestige associated with it. Now, rational expectations equilibrium, a bit like a Nash equilibrium, I'm going to use. If you say that with getting a government job, this is the level of prestige, P. If that sparks off a behavior which makes the prestige associated with a government job equal to P. So if you expect the prestige to be P, if that sparks off a behavior that makes the prestige to be P, then you've got a rational expectations equilibrium, which is almost like a Nash equilibrium, if you were writing it as a game. Now you'll get the following result. If there are very few people waiting for government jobs, some prestige, and maybe with that prestige, very few will try for the government job. Let us now say that through these coaching classes, drum beating, lots of people wait for these few government jobs. Prestige is expected to be very high because lots of people are waiting for very few jobs. If prestige is that high, lots of people will wait for that job. Because the government job has now become very valuable, not because of the perks or the salary, but because the prestige has gone up because lots of people are waiting. Which means in this kind of a labor market, you can have multiple equilibria. Few people waiting for government jobs, small prestige, few people wait for it. Lots of people waiting for government job, huge prestige, that makes lots of people wait for the government job. In fact, there will be an odd number of equilibria always, as you'll be familiar with these things. Odd number of equilibria, a case of 3 equilibria, 2 stable equilibria, large unemployment, small unemployment is entirely possible. These coaching classes, and we have not worked enough on this, they must be beginning to figure out their interest is in having a big unemployment over here because these people are giving the profits of the coaching classes. Our next aim is 2 things to do. One is theoretically modeling the coaching classes and their objectives, and my students, Saloni and a couple of others, they haven't yet decided. Maybe Delhi, Pune, somewhere they want to go and collect data from the coaching classes, the sort of calculations going into the student's head to try to give it more empirical structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Basu, for such an insightful lecture. Now the floor is open for Q&A.
On the empirical side, there's a suggestion, especially in northern India, depending upon the exam for which you are preparing, not even got into it, your dowry levels go up. So if we make a correlation, I think some empirical results might come out.
Absolutely. As you're saying, Satish, I'm also thinking, and it is also possible that it'll have a correlation with the prestige factor, the dowry. So there will be a little bit of the algebra of dowry, how high it'll go, how low it'll go. Indeed, that is something to be kept in mind. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
What about China? Is there a similar phenomenon there, or coaching class based?
Yeah.
There used to be a long time ago, many thousand years ago maybe, with the Confucian mentality and for government jobs.
See, I don't know the Chinese youth unemployment now, as I just showed, is comparable to India's. You probably know a couple of years ago, Xi Jinping took of coaching, of tutorials in the evenings, he put a block to it so that you can't openly anymore do evening tuition for a fee. But I'm told, I'm actually coming to India from China. I was told it's gone underground, lots of teaching taking place, but not being done openly. So even recently it's happening. But whether this is a driver of China's high youth unemployment, I can't quite tell. The one difference with, China now is about, how many times? China's per capita GDP is about $13,000, ours is $2,600, so much richer. So wages have gone up. China is being hit more by the fact that machines are coming in, and unless labor is much cheaper, the demand is going down. So for China, it's probably a combination of factors, including that. But thank you.
Hello, what's the reason of taking age as 15 to 24? Because there are people, students over 24 that, are unemployed and preparing for coaching and preparing for other employment jobs.
A complete global convention. So very difficult for me to tell. From ILO to World Bank, all of them use 15 to 24 as an age category. And then you go 24 and above. So if you different cutoffs, so that was not chosen by me. But what I did say, you have to remember, is unemployment is not defined by those who are in school, college, doing regular thing. Those who are trying to get a job and not getting. So even though you're taking 15 to 24, which in jars one, as it's jarring you, once you realize the definition of unemployment, it's not that jarring, and it's a convention worldwide that is used now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the lecture. I am not from economic background. I just have a curiosity to ask that when we say that the labor demand is decreasing over time, because even in the past, due to time, there has been a different jobs which are no more exist. So the decrease in labor requirement is isn't it like a continuous process? Like, where do you mark that the labor market, there is a shortage in labor requirement? So
it is true that as technology progresses, there is a tendency, and we saw this during the Industrial Revolution, where suddenly demand for traditional labor was going. So there's a drift in the direction that you're pointing out. But the world goes through periods when there's a sudden rush of new technology, and one kind of work suddenly begins to go. So when that new technology is coming in during the Industrial Revolution, sharp drop, causing many unexpected problems. One thing that happened was, with this kind of machinery, a lot of work could be done by children. And there are beautiful statements by judges being given that it's a fantastic machine. I'm going to give you immediately the patent on it, because you can use little children, 7, 8 years old, to work with this. So it's changing the pattern of labor. What's happening today again is because of the digital revolution. If you look at the data, I had some, but I haven't brought, from about 1975 or so, suddenly it's going very quickly. Two things you can raise, and lots of people will say that there's no reason to be pessimistic. Every time it's happened before, new kind of labor, demand for new kind of labor happens, and you get out of it. It's happened till now. My little fear is, this time the revolution is so big, whatever seems painful, machines may take it away, even intellectual work. But what I shared with the optimists is, this is no reason to despair. If machines are doing everything for us, bringing food to our table, clothes, etc., as long as we have a system where we are sharing the benefits of the machine, and number two, there's one more important thing that I did not go into. We have to learn to use time in different ways. If traditional work has gone, for most people, it'll be a horrible life, because work, also a certain amount of work is a part of your life. But if it goes, you'll have to train the human mind that learn to enjoy music, learn to read philosophy, learn to look at art, do your own painting. I do believe that the nature of education will have to change to get into this new world. So I'm not completely sure that the demand for labor will remain. I feel this time it could really go in 20 years, but that is no reason for optimism if we remodel, understand the world, and bring in new policies. Yeah.
Thank you for a very insightful lecture. You compared Vietnam. Vietnam has done phenomenally well. So what is it that states in India or at the central government level, state level, what can they do to make things happen here and bring unemployment down?
Professor Shishir Shah. So let me tell you, it takes me a bit outside this, but I've been writing. It's a bit of a puzzle. Why countries have stepped into the manufacturing space that China was vacating, and you begin to manufacture in a big way. Vietnam is the huge success story. Bangladesh also is a success story. Leave aside its politics now, but the garment industry, the way it came in, no one had expected. I feel, again, this is the reason why I feel in the end the mind is important. Just drum beating will not do. There is something very specific is my view, and I must tell you that. You know, India has a law which goes back to 1947, Industrial Disputes Act, 1947. I feel there are elements in it. This is controversial. This sounds very right-wing free market, but one should not allow ideology to crowd one's thinking. There's something in this law which now has been amended somewhat, but not enough. That law has a provision saying that originally it was if you have more than 100 workers, if you want to sack your workers, you have to take permission from the government. After that, it was amended in 1984. It was made that if you have more than 200 workers, you have to take permission. Now it has been amended again to 300. But this thing that you have to go to government to take permission, most governments don't give permission because it looks very anti-labor to say you can downsize. You know, when I was in government, I had this is stuck in my head from that time. Some people from the garment industry, entrepreneurs would come to me and say that, Professor Basu, there's demand for a new kind of clothing in America, which I can produce and swamp the market. We are very good at that kind. But the trouble with the Indian law is if I today expand my firm to supply, I'm stuck. Even if the fashion goes, I will not be able to downsize anymore. So one can do a little calculation that many an opportunity for expansion firms are giving up, because you have to also be prepared that the downsizing might come if you're lumped with it. I feel, you know, this law has hurt India. And this, my radical friends with whom I agree on many other things disagree very strongly with me on this, but I feel it has affected negatively. And there's also history. It's not hard data evidence. You know, since this is a 1947 law, actually it's a pre-15th August law. So Pakistan and India was born with the same law. Pakistan got rid of it completely for the wrong reason. 1958, Ayub Khan having difficulty with Bangladesh labor, just ripped the law out, it was gone. Pakistan never replaced it with decent labor protection laws. But interesting, almost controlled experiment, Bangladesh being born out of Pakistan is without that law in 1971 when Bangladesh is being born. Bangladesh reconstructs its labor law much better than Pakistan, but without this clause. And if you look at the garment industries in Bangladesh, literally 5-6 times the size of Indian ones. So I believe there's a lot in the minutiae of the law. If we really put in specialist minds, India has the scope in the manufacturing sector, like Vietnam, like other countries. Another 10-15 years, then our wages will begin to rise. We will face the kind of problem being faced everywhere. Thank you.
So changing this is politically difficult? Is that...
Yeah, so on the face of it, as soon as you say that you're removing the firms acquire the right to downsize, it sounds very wrong. And it is true that politics is such a weird world. In the name of changing it for the better, we can change the law in such a way that in the end only the entrepreneurs are benefiting. I do believe that with the farm laws, some of it was done. Farm laws need changing, but it was not being changed in the right way. So this one does have political stumbling blocks, but if there's a real honest committee, sits down, works out the details, arm's length, it can be done. And India has several years where India, like Vietnam, can get into the space in a big way.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Migration also, because so many people are going from one country to another just for a better living and better job. So, I mean, how do you put it with this
You know, this particular paper, the third part that I presented, is very much in the Indian context. So I was not going into those, but what you're doing is drawing attention to the fact that there are other countries with very different kinds of setting. India is still a very populous country. Our population is not growing as rapidly as it used to, but still it's growing. But there are other countries like Japan, where the population is going down. And Japan is a good example because up to the 1980s, if you look at the growth between Japan and USA, many people believed that Japan is going to overtake USA. Nowhere near now. Japan began to stall, USA continued to grow. There are other countries. Korea is now neck to neck with Japan. In the next 2 years, Korea is going to overtake Japan. All this was unthinkable in 1980s. I believe Japan played its labor wrong. Japan needed outside labor. Given that it is basically its population is falling, aging, it's also got a fiscal problem, small working population trying to support an aging population. There is a paper 2-3 years ago by Sagiri Kitao, which describes some of the labor problem of Japan and how Japan needs very, very different policies, including much more of an open door policy. Any country wants to be careful. You don't want the country to be flooded, but if you want to do it in the right way, United States, I believe it will make a big mistake if it begins to close its doors. The opening of the doors for the US was a breath of energy that got United States growing. And I'll give you my favorite example, which I keep going into. You know, if you go to 1920s, there are writings in American newspapers that Argentina is going to overtake United States. It was standard story. Argentina had grown for about 40 years phenomenally and was ready to overtake. I feel there the mistake was roughly in this. US after that went into a policy of letting in people, letting in talent, and nurturing higher education. These two, and Argentina went into a phobic phase, closing down doors, and education system, of course, US overtook. These things changed the landscape in a big way. So once you look at the global landscape, very different stories, but I had focused mine specifically on India. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the thoughtful and engaging questions. We don't have time for more questions right now, so maybe we can take it up later. I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Professor Basu for not only delivering such an enlightening session, but also taking the time to address the questions. Now I would like to invite Professor Narayanan to deliver the vote of thanks.
Or I can come that chair. Okay, come here. I'm here. It's very easy. One step up.
Thank you, Professor Basu and friends. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that a couple of things that really, stands quite clear to us in terms of firstly, the global perspective that Professor Basu can give us on any issue that we observed, on which he has spoken the last visits, and it continues. The global perspective is fantastic and good learning for all of us. And how to formulate a theoretical model based on an empirical observation is something that is a learning experience for Basu. I've been fortunate to be a student for 4 decades ago, but over the years it is getting better and better, and the very lucid explanation of the model. That's what we really picked up quite well. And the issue of stigma, prestige, and esteem. I mean, it's how important it is for the economists also to think about in modeling. On the whole, it was a wonderful learning experience, and thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture here. We continue to look forward to your visit and the lectures in IIT Bombay. Thank you so much. Please join. We can invite him for a moment. Yeah, sorry. May I now request Professor Satish Agnihotri also to join on the stage to hand over the memento to Professor Kaushik Basu. Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to thank everyone for joining us today for this lecture. I request everyone to join for a cup of tea in the foyer outside.